Hey, where are we today, Erika?
We're at Grandpa's house.
And what day is it?
It's 24th of November, 1995.
The day after Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And what are we doing today?
We are taking an interview. Yay!
And who are we interviewing?
My grandpa. Alright. We will start out with, how about, where were you born?
Where was I born? I was born in this house in Britton, South Dakota, in the master bedroom, and I was actually born in the home, not in the hospital in Britton, because there was no hospital at that time in 1922. So this is the house in which I was born.
Okay. What date was that like?
I was born on August 10th, 1922.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
So I have one older brother, one younger brother, and the youngest in the family was my sister. My older brother was born in 1920, my other brother was born in 24, and my sister was born in 1928, and we had a stillborn sister at the time of birth in 1934.
Okay. Did you like your position in the family, like not being youngest or oldest?
Being the second, I think I would have to say that I liked having an older brother. I think that was advantageous of being the second one, and I don't remember anything detrimental to being the second, and then having a younger brother was fine. And then the sister coming along later worked out very well. She would complain about that, but I would.
Oh. Did you guys fight a lot, or did you get along pretty good?
Well, I think basically we got along very satisfactorily. My sister would complain that we, kind of dominated her as a girl, but amongst the boys, I think we basically got along real well. I told you, since you came this time, of a little incident where I was having a squabble with my younger brother and reacted to it incorrectly, and I think my parents straightened me out quite well probably at the time.
Yeah. What did you and your family do together, like trips or like just get together?
Well, of course, in the 20s and the 30s, as we were growing up, you didn't travel like you did now. However, my folks were both from Toronto, South Dakota, Brookings County. It's about 150 miles from here, and therefore a lot of our trips were to Toronto, where there were some relatives, and in summertime, Dad would take us to Toronto, and my dad ran the grain elevator in town, which meant summertime was a busy time for him. And so he would take us to Toronto, and I had a widowed aunt, Thora, that lived out on a farm, and her son was doing the farming. He was probably 10, 15 years older than I. And so we would stay out on the farm, and Mother and my sister would stay in town with her cousin. And so we had real good times staying out on the farm in the late 20s and the early 30s. And in the tougher times, it was still fun to be involved in the farm, and where they were, milking cows, and they had chickens, and you separated cream and did things that we didn't do living in town. So that was enjoyable. I don't remember, we took a vacation in 1936 that I remember. We went to the Black Hills. 36 was a particularly bad crop year, and therefore my dad felt he could take a week off from the elevator, and we went to the Black Hills, and that's a trip that I remember and was real special. I can remember that we went to Minneapolis in the late 20s, and probably first trip maybe about 1930, 29, and so I don't remember much about Minneapolis except the fact that we went there. We went to Fargo one time, I can remember that. Aberdeen is 60 miles away. We got to go to Aberdeen at least once or twice a year maybe, and my childhood friend that lived right next door to us here moved out of Britain we would have started first grade, what year would I have started? In 28, and they moved to Aberdeen in that time, and so we'd go visit that family, and I got to go to the YMCA down there and to go swimming. I could relate one embarrassing situation when you went to the YMCA and went swimming, and in the indoor enclosed pool, of course you had to go take a shower before you went in. And for boys, you swam in the nude. You couldn't wear a wool suit because it plug up filter systems and such. So you'd come out of the shower, and then the lifeguard would give you an inspection to make sure you were clean enough, and he would just take a thumb and rub it on your skin, and if you rolled up some dirt, well, you had to go back into the shower, and I got sent back into the shower because I hadn't soap good enough to clean up. But that was an incident I remember. But it was always fun to go swimming in the YMCA pool in Aberdeen. So that was some interesting things. In the winter time, Dad, the three boys, we all took our sleds on behind our probably 1928 Oakland or Whippet, whatever kind of a car we had, and he would drive out into the country on the snow-packed roads, and we would ride the sleds, or around town, pull the sleds behind the car. So that was a winter sport, and then maybe later a toboggan behind the car, and I did that later with my own kids, so that was winter sport.
On the farm, did you have chores that you had assigned to do when you were there?
When we visited there, I wouldn't say assigned, things we participated in. My cousin Ralph, who, as I say, was older than I, the wells had gone dry in the 30s on the farm we stayed on, so we had to go over to a neighboring farm where they still had a well, and Ralph would have us kids then compete with one another, see who could, the hand pump, we had to pump and pumped into pails that were dumped into barrels then, and he would get us in a competition to see who could pump the pump, how many strokes we could do before we wore out, and as a result, he didn't have to do any of the pumping, and we just knocked ourselves out trying to outdo one another, and turning when they milked the cows and then brought the milk in and separated the cream, so the cream separator, and for bringing a cream separator up to speed, if you've never done it, you don't know what I'm talking about, but as you got the discs turning in there, it really pumped hard, and when you got up to speed, then a little weight that was onto the handle would quit clicking because you were going fast enough. So we got to turn the cream separator while we separated the milk, and that again was a chore you did. Thing I didn't like about the farm was you had to take a bath once a week, of course, was the common practice in that time, and you heat some water, and of course there was no running water in the farm, no indoor toilet or anything, but and they set a big wooden tub on the kitchen floor, and that's where you had to take your bath, and that always, I thought that kind of wasn't very private, just taking Saturday baths in the tub on the kitchen floor, but that's where it was.
Okay, what kind of chores do you have at home, like cleaning or?
What kind of toys did we have? I don't remember playing cowboy and Indians, so I can't remember that I had guns, a jackknife to play mumbly peg with, and had toys like that. I can remember, of course, in 1929, my older brother and I both got brand new bicycles. That was the good times. 1934, my favorite gift, I got a football with a side fill, the needle that you put in and put the pump on it. Prior to that, you had to blow the bladder of the football up, and then you had to lace it after you blew it up, and that was difficult to do. Football was always a thing that I played and was real interested in, more so than than playing with a softball or playing catch. I think football was an early sport, and when I got that nice football that was pre-laced and with the side fill, that was a wonderful thing. But I think that reflects my bicycle probably cost my dad close to $30, and he got 2 of those for Christmas in '29. But in '34, that football probably cost from Montgomery Ward $3, and I think that reflects the times of how prosperous they felt from one time to another. The trucks, the tricycles, I've got pictures of these high-wheeled tricycles we had, and then the 2-wheel scooters. You've seen them. They've come back in recent years where you put one foot on and you scoot, and we had those. And if you got a real fancy one, it even had a brake on it, or you could step on and had a stand so you could set it on a stand. And I don't remember that I had that fancy one, but using scooters and the wagons, of course.
What kind of things did you do in town, like during the weekends or at school?
What did we
For
do
fun?
in town? And I took piano lessons. My mother was a piano teacher, so we had to take piano from the time preschool up until 4th grade, and then I got my first clarinet and joined a band at that time. The first band I went to was a city band, but then we got music in school, so we participated both in the singing and the band in school got important. Athletics in school started in the grades, maybe 6th grade, and you played basketball, and I can remember going with a grade school basketball team to a town that's that town is 25 miles away from here, so we made a road trip and went and played basketball away from just intramural in our own school. Summertime, we played softball over on the vacant lot near our house, and you sat out and you played. You don't probably know what I'm saying. Mumbly peg with a jackknife, where you put it on your nose and throw it and stick it in the ground on your forehead and down your elbow and down. That was a sport that you could play out in your yard, and I'm sure we played some cowboy and Indians and go to the country. We had a BB gun, and later when I got older, then we had one single shot 22 rifle, and we would go shooting gophers. You could go out to a pasture with a lot of gophers, and Dr. Erdahl bought our gophers to feed to his foxes, and he would pay us a penny apiece, and so we bring in gophers, and if we'd been lucky enough, a 50 shell box of 22 shorts would cost us around 20 cents. If we got 20 gophers with 50 shots, then we could buy another box of shells and go shoot gophers again, and without costing us any money. So we did that. The swimming pool in Britain opened in 1934. And so I was 12 years old, and 34 was a terrible, dusty, dirty, windy, poor crop year. It was a wonderful year from my standpoint because the pool was open and we went swimming, and Dad could buy us a ticket where a swim cost us, I can't remember exactly, but I think instead of 10 cents, cost us 7 cents on the ticket, and we were allowed to go swimming once a day at that time. So we couldn't go twice a day, but we could go once a day, and then if we helped clean the pool in the morning, we got to swim, of course, in cleaning the pool, the vacuuming system, and once in a while some older adult, I maybe remember very few, would pay the dime and let us come swimming, some adult that was swimming. So the swimming pool was very, very important. Of course, I went to work in a grocery store in 1936 after I got out of 8th grade, and therefore I had to work every day, so that cut down on that. But I could make, when I went to work for Art Bonham, I worked for his wife up doing yard work and things, and then I took him down to the store, and I could make 10 cents an hour, he paid me. And so on on a long Saturday, the 15-hour Saturday, I could make $1.50, and then when I went to work full-time in the summertime, well, then he put me on salary, and I got $35 a month. So I was really making big money in those days.
How did your childhood differ from childhood today?
How does it differ from childhood today? I suppose the thing that I would feel is what's available to the children of today as against when I was just a child. The first place, no television would come to my mind, but and as I grew up, the limited use of an automobile. We learned how to drive very young, and but we didn't have access to the car. I drove, the first car I drove was our 1934 Chevrolet, and we had to go. We owned 2 cows, which somebody kept in town, and then in a pasture near here, and so twice a day we had to go get them can of milk. That was the fellow that took care of them. He and his wife were retired farmers. They got all the milk that they wanted, and we had to go get it twice a day. So we were allowed to drive the car down to the east end of town and pick up the milk, and so you could maybe sneak a drive out to the mile corner back with the car. So you got some driving experience that way, and but mainly I think is playing pump pull away outside at night. You didn't stay in and watch TV because it wasn't. You played games out, or prisoner's goal with the neighborhood kids. You were outside a lot, just figuring out what to do, or just wandering out to the country to maybe shoot your BB gun or something like that. And when older, then to go gopher shooting. But we always came in to listen to the radio, the Jack Armstrong, and what were the other programs, Little Orphan Annie, or whatever. We had certain, and then Amos and Andy on the radio, which my parents or Dad listened to. Then us kids also listened to the Amos and Andys and different radio programs like that.
Okay. What do you remember best about your mom and dad? Like, did they punish you a lot?
What do I remember best about my mother and dad? Well, I have only favorable thoughts of my parents. I think my parents were, in a way, they were strict in how we were brought up. My mother's bringing up I never learned how to dance. I'll say that. My mother dancing was not right when she was a little girl, in a very strict bringing up, and her dad died my grandfather died at 1898, I think. And so my mother was only 12 years old when she lost her dad, and so she was brought up by her mother. When they walked down the street of Toronto, I can remember my mother talking, and they were walking by the bowling alley. They weren't allowed to look in that evil place. And so we weren't allowed to go to the pool hall in Britain. Jay Parker ran a real good pool hall down under the Dakin's drugstore, and a lot of kids went down and learned how to shoot pool. I did not. Mother didn't approve of us going to a pool hall. Now my dad went down there and played cards all the time. That he even when we were kids, then there were certain nights that Dad went down for relaxation and played cards. But I never went down to the pool hall and learned how to shoot pool. So that was a stricter upbringing than some kids. However, we went with a group of kids, a bunch of boys and girls, and we had parties in some houses, but if I was supposed to be home by midnight on a party night, that meant I was to be home by midnight. One time I came home a little late, and And I can remember my dad sitting me down on the radiator in their bedroom, and the radiator was hot because it was a wintertime party, and he kind of lectured me, and my seat was kind of burning from sitting on the hot radiator, and I kind of got up, and he said, sit down, and I got down on the, anyhow, 12 o'clock meant 12 o'clock, and very strict about that. But I have only favorable mother. Saturday was baking day, and being three boys, we had to do chores and do dishes, and if you're making lefse, then we did some of the initial rolling of lefse, and of course she gave lessons, and in payment for music lessons, we maybe got a half a hog, and so Dad would cut the hog up, and so then you grind, or you got some beef and you grind with a hand grinder. We helped with that, and processing the meat and canning chickens at that time, and things like that. We got involved in household chores, and probably taking the rug out and hanging it on the line and beating it with a carpet beater, which you don't do nowadays, so that, and my father was always good in helping around the kitchen. And when it was laundry day, then you had the old wringer washers, and we probably had to take the clothes were ready to go through the wringer, and would help with things like that. So I can remember doing household chores with my mother, and Dad. Of course, the family did a lot of things. I can remember going out to dinner on Sunday. So he apparently, on occasions, we went down to the hotel in town and had dinner, or to a cafe in town and had dinner. And, so I think they were very generous with us. Through the tough times, my dad had a better than average job being manager of the elevator. Not that his salary didn't drop, but probably what he made on salary was four times what a family man did on WPA, for instance. So we didn't get relief food. Somebody would come by with the big oranges that were available to people who got some food through the relief office. We were well enough off to not participate in programs like that, which was worthwhile. From that standpoint, I could tell you an instance of something that you're aware of, and that is one night in the wintertime, a coupe, a car, backed up to our front door, and they had a rack on the back of that coupe, and they had a baby grand piano on it. And as I remember the story, that had been ordered for somebody. The piano company from Aberdeen probably was delivering it, and the people that had ordered it, times had turned so bad for them that they could not accept it. So this fellow came to our house, and he just wanted to bring it in to see how it looked and let my mother play it, and he brought that baby grand piano in, and the baby grand piano never left our house. Well, I like to say that probably when it stayed, that my dad paid for that piano. He didn't sign a contract and have monthly payments, so that was so important to my mother that the expenditure was worthwhile. Now, I like to just jokingly say, of course, we didn't eat very good that winter, but that would not be true. But so that, and whether that involved a $500 or $600 expenditure to buy a baby grand piano at that time. That piano stayed, and you played that piano, of course, over to my sister's home at Alexandria. So that piano is still in the family. But that was an example, I think, of how my parents lived conservatively. My dad had lost some land down in Brookings County and was kind of a plunger. I thought he was such a conservative individual. He became conservative because the plunging he did in the 20s and up to 1919 in the crash, then he and his brothers had bought some land and lost it, so they lived conservatively and lived within their income, and that's why I became more conservative than I should have, I think, because of the way my dad brought me up. Remembering my parents, and of course you're aware that my mother died in 1946 when I was in the Navy. And when I went away to college in 1940, and then I came home for a while, and I was in the Navy, and my mother died at 54 years of age in 1946, which was difficult for me because I had to go back to the Navy, and I went aboard ship to realize that when I came home, my mother wasn't going to be here anymore. And that's probably what brought me back to Britain. My dad was a widower, and I had a job available to me here, so it was kind of logically for me to come home, and we batched for the year, and Dad lived with us after I got married in 47 until 1970. So my dad, I saw him finish his working career and grow old, and I just think the world of my father.
How old were you when you went off to college and Navy and everything?
How old was what?
How old were you
When
you went into the Navy?
Well, I went to college in 1940, and that really worked out well for me because then I started my sophomore year in 1941, so Pearl Harbor happened in December. I had finished almost one semester my sophomore year. I had to register for the draft in the spring of 1942, and I started my junior year in the fall of 1942, and the draft was breathing down my neck. I got a notice I was going to be drafted, and so I enlisted in the Navy in 1942 in their, and because I was in college, I can enlist in their officer training program. And so then I went back to college. About half of the kids up at college that were enlisting like that were called up into what they call a V-12 program. They went into uniform, they got $75 a month. They had to go to the college where there was a reserve unit. I did not get called up, so I stayed at Concordia, and I had to go to summer school. And so from the time I enlisted in the Navy in 1942 until about the end of January 1944, I never heard from them. Of course, the college reported on my progress, and so I got called up to active duty then in 1944, which then would put me at 21 years of age. My 22nd birthday was coming in 44, so I went to Northwestern University downtown Chicago campus to the midshipman school, and started then in the what month did I go there? June to May, April, March. In March of 1944, I started midshipman school, and finished in July. Got my commission in July, and then went to California to the training bases there. So the fact that I was in college and was old enough enabled me to get into this program, which worked out very well for me in the Navy. And so then I had 4 months training there, 4 months training in California, and went aboard a ship in the fall of 44 and spent 19 months on one ship, and then I got on another one for a couple months, then I got out.
Did you ever have problems being on the ships, like seasickness or?
I never got seasick. We had some, our first trip, we picked up the ship was a brand new ship, and I went aboard in Astoria. I just mentioned going by, my girlfriend was teaching school in Montana at the time, and came out to Portland, and that was Cecilia, and so I boarded that ship in November of 1944, went up to Seattle, and we ran into some real stormy weather, and I survived. I got close to getting seasick, but I never did, and after that never did. All I remember about my 19 months aboard the ship are the pleasant memories now, and since we started our reunions, and have had 4 reunions due every 2 years, I enjoy we get 50 or 60 of the crew people together, and so I've gotten very interested in researching and getting the ship's logs, as you're aware of, and things about that period of time in my life.
What was your first school like? Your first school, was it the one here?
Going to grade school in Britain, South Dakota. Yeah. And I don't remember that I was an excellent student. I got by, but the reading and writing and arithmetic that we got there, and third grade, probably, who was my teacher? Fourth grade teacher was Lucille Perkle, who later was my boss's wife, and the spelling bees where you picked up teams, and I don't remember being a real enthusiastic participant in the spelling contests, and if you missed the word you had to sit down and such. So I think I was a good average student, and as I got into sixth grade, Marion Steitler was my teacher in sixth grade, and I was worried about, well, you started worrying down in third, fourth grade about seventh and eighth grade, because those two teachers for seventh and eighth grade, they were strict, and Miss Frank and Jenny Stewart, they were the terror of the elementary student. And that's kind of funny because they were both retired and gone by the time I got to seventh and eighth grade. But how, as young kids, you dreaded the day when you were going to have to go to the class of Jenny Stewart. But grade school was interesting, a lot of fun. Recesses were fun, and and then by the time we got into seventh and eighth grade, then you were participating in some sports and a little bit of music, and by the time we got to high school, then classes went by just fine, but the participation, the band program had developed real well, and the music programs, and you participated in everything: football, basketball, and track, and band, and orchestra, and chorus. You just, I participated. I lettered in all sports all 4 years, and played lead clarinet in the band my freshman year, and through the 4 years, and got on. I made the football team and the basketball team. I made the first team football when I was a freshman, and I was on the squad, the traveling squad, which was 8 players in basketball my freshman year. And so now some of my friends would tell me that's because my dad was on the school board, but I think it was because I was real interested in sports.
What subjects in school did you like best? Did you have a favorite subject?
That's a little difficult to answer. I did not like science, biology or chemistry, history and economics. I didn't like Latin, which you took as a language. That's the only language they taught in high school. So that probably followed through. Then when I got into college, I majored in economics, and I minored in math, and so I think that was the kind of the way I was in high school, would lean towards subjects like that.
What was the most difficult subject for you?
Well, that's in high school or
Anytime.
college.
Anytime.
Yeah, I thought in mathematics as I went to get a minor in college, that as I was taking theoretical equations and such as that, I had a roommate, and so I've got to enter him into this conversation. And my roommate finished Concordia with a major in mathematics and a major in chemistry, and I think he had 2 or 3 majors: physics and chemistry and mathematics, and he was a real brain, but kind of a son of a gun, and I got along fine with Doug, but it was so easy for him, I'd be working on my math, and he'd be working on us at our desk in the dormitory up there, and he was likely to pound his chest and say, I'm a genius, and it irritated me because I'm having trouble with my theoretical equations. I thought I was at the top part of my ability, maybe getting a minor in math at the time. Economic courses, I took all the economics I could from Professor Helmstead, and he always gave me A's, and I graduated cum laude, so I got satisfactory grades. I took a psychology course once I hated, got one of my 4 grades, but I didn't like Dr. Burgess, and I didn't care for the course, and I still don't I wouldn't trust a psychologist or a psychiatrist if I needed them now.
What was your biggest school accomplishment?
My biggest school accomplishment? Well, I think that I went to college at the right time, and the college was small, and I was so enthused about football, and I played football at Concordia, and I was we were co-champions of the Minnesota Intercollegiate Conference, which included Concordia, St. Thomas, St. John, St. Olaf, Gustavus, and that conference, and we were the co-champions in football in 1942, and I was quarterback of the football team, and that was, of course, you got to realize that once Pearl Harbor had happened and the war had started, I had no problem worrying about what I was going to do when I got out of college. I had no idea when I would get out of college. So I had no worry about job, because I was going to get a government job. I knew that. I was going to be in the service. And so approaching college changed, in my opinion, at that point. But so the football was important to me. The fact that I was president of the student body as a senior, I didn't consider that very important, because Sig Bjorknes had been elected president of the student body, and he had got called up to the service, and so he was gone. And so I kind of think, because I stayed and there weren't many men left around, sometime by default you got the impression that maybe you were more important than you really were, and I put myself kind of in that category, because however, I'm real proud of the fact that I was a member of that football team, and there were still enough around at that time to play. I had to have some reasonable ability to accomplish that. My studies, I got satisfactory grades, so I apparently studied, and probably I always said my major at Concordia was custodial work, custodial engineering, because I spent more time doing janitor work trying to make a little bit of money to pay for my college than anything I did while I was in college.
Is there anything you regret doing, or not doing in school? Like missing out on an opportunity or going somewhere?
I don't think, if I'm honest about it, that I have any regrets at all. I think that had my mother lived, I would not have returned to Britain, South Dakota. So her untimely death established something, established the pattern that I went into, and I don't regret that I did that. I'm very happy that I went to college and that I got in the service, that I have got as many places I did when I was in the service on the West Coast, and whether it was Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, and exposed to things, and I was totally happy to come back to the small town. I suppose that the logical thing would have been, if I got out of the service, what would I have done? I'd have gone back to college, because they had the GI Bill, and I could get a monthly payment and get my college paid for. What would I have taken? I guess I don't know, because I didn't have to really speculate. Would I have gone on and got a master's degree in something? Would I have gone into education? I envisioned myself probably as a potential businessman, and I found that field available to me in Britain, South Dakota. So I'm happy that I came back to Britain. I'm happy that I have never moved in my life. I'm satisfied that that's the pattern I took, and I'm real pleased that Celia and I have done. We don't go south for the winter. We've done considerable traveling in the last decade, and our first big trip was what, 1976, 86. This is 95. So over the last 20 years, you know, we've done a lot of things that I'm kind of happy about.
With your friends at school, what did you do? Did you have any pranks you did, or like Halloween pranks?
At school, Halloween, of course, at grade school, and those other kids that did all the pranks that I saw. But you know, Halloween used to be kind of a night of pranks, which it isn't anymore. And the older kids that went down and got the junk cars off of Morse's lot and brought them up to the school, and then ran them down the hill and crashed them into each other, the old Model Ts and things like that. Probably in my era, having a Halloween party at somebody's home and the group of kids I ran with, you know, and we had parties. I don't remember that. College, I didn't get involved in pranks. There used to be the competition between North Dakota State and Concordia, and so the attempt for state students to come over to Concordia's campus and vice versa. I think maybe I served some guard duty. Concordia in the dormitory, one of our friends whose dad was had a store, brought firecrackers in because the dean had said there will be no firing or shooting of firecrackers in the building, you know. And so once he put that out, I think all the kids that had access to getting some got them and brought them. And one night I remember being involved in Rollin Hockey. Had worked for the railroad, and he got some of these explosives that they put on the railroad track, so when the train runs along you can hear the explosion, and that there's a work crew ahead, and we fastened that on the bottom of a hammer and drop it out of my third-story dormitory window and try to hit the sidewalk so it would explode. It didn't. He brought it back up the second time and maybe the third time, and it exploded. And you could hear it all over Moorhead, and the police came out to Concordia, and I remember leaving and going to the art exhibit over in the gymnasium immediately thereafter, and you know, little things like that weren't very serious.
Did you have a best friend or really close friend, or just a bunch of close
Do I
friends?
have a what?
Did you have one really close friend or a bunch of close friends?
Well, close friend. You know, I had friends. I didn't have a close friend. Now, what age bracket are you talking about? In any time.
Yeah.
And of course, I got to go back to preschool and say Charles Moen was my friend who lived next door. They'd moved in, and so he was the close friend that moved away before we went to college. And I don't. We had our neighborhood football team, and we played another neighborhood football team. So we had friends, but to pick out one and say that was my close friend, and I don't think I can go to college and pick out one individual that was my close friend. And of course, Celia became my close friend towards the end of my college career, and was my girlfriend when I left to go into the service. And
Okay. What early jobs did you have?
The early job that I can remember is going to work for Mrs. Bonham. Art Bonham had a grocery store in town, and Mrs. Bonham, they had no children, and she, around her house, did a lot of gardening. And so I got to work for Mrs. Bonham probably in about 1935 or 34, and so then she's planting bushes, and so I'm up there and dig the hole and help her plant, and she's moving these flowers, and so I can't remember what she would have paid me to work a nickel an hour, or certainly not a dime an hour, because that was too big a wage. And then in the 30s, without weed killers, thistles. Your yard would just growing thistles, and so in her yard, you picked the thistles, and that's a thing I can remember. And she paid on a contract basis on thistles. I got a penny 100. So I pick 100 thistles, and I made a penny. And so you kept track yourself of how many. And so in controlling thistles in her yard, she hired a kid to go pick thistles and in the yard, and that was her going rate for a penny 100. So I worked for her, and then that got me the job then into the grocery store, and then I worked for a contractor when they built an annex to the elevator, and there I made really big money because I got 35 cents an hour, and which was what the adult that I was working with was getting the same wage, and we were common labor and moving lumber, hauling cement and things, bags of cement and stuff like that. So I was high school age at that time.
When you were in the Navy, do you have like any stories about that? Or did you enjoy it a lot?
When I was in the Navy, do I have any stories
Yeah.
to tell? Oh, I think once we got aboard the ship, and then we came down. My first trip into San Francisco, we picked up our more boats for our ship and got our full complement. I went aboard the ship as a member of the boat group, and then a junior division officer and a junior deck officer, and then we got down to Long Beach area and to San Diego and did a lot of training in for a couple of months down there. So that what special things came to mind when we were at Long Beach, a friend of mine from Britain who had lived in Britain back in the 20s, he was a Navy pilot, and so New Year's of 1944, we were in the harbor at Long Beach, and Phil called me, and we went to the Palladium in Hollywood for the New Year's Eve dance, and I can't remember whether Harry James Band was playing, and of course he'd gotten me a date, and so that was my. And Phil owned a car or had a car, and so we got to go there, and I can remember them dumping me off at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning at the ship after the New Year's Eve celebration, and then the ship left at 6 o'clock in the morning. So you stayed up all night in Chicago when I was in the Navy. Then we went to the Lutheran Service Center in Chicago on weekends when we were able to get out, and there was always food available, sandwiches and desserts, and the ladies' aids of the area would come in there with food, and as I understood it, there were so many churches in that area that the ladies only got to come in once a year, and so it was a good place to go and hang out, and I met there were volunteers, and Dorothy Thiel and Mary Lou Giese, I can tell you their names, were there, and so that they would visit with you, they would play foosball with you, they would draw a picture if they were going to an art school. I've got a picture that one, and I got well acquainted there. And then we would leave when they closed the place up. We might go to a movie, and maybe before 4 or 5 of us fellows, and Dorothy and Mary Lou, and we could all throw in a little money, and we could even take them. And so then we would go to a show at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. The show was going all night, and then after you got out of the show, then I can remember one night being assigned the job of taking Dorothy home. She lived in Chicago, and got to to her house, and her sister was there, and I'll use the word boyfriend, and play a game, and then I get back and I'm heading for my dormitory at Northwestern University, and the sun is coming up, so they're, being up, and you had to wait for streetcars to ride, and then one time Dorothy invited me to take her to a dance, which I couldn't do, but at the Art Institute. She was a student at the Art Institute in Chicago, and so I danced among the statues, and such as my dancing ability would permit me. That was some things we did there. Service time was, when we were in the States, was exposed to new things that I had never been. And down in San Diego, and I always blame my friends for getting me involved in dates, but Harold Erickson, he met the girls that were from Chula Vista, and I got to tell you this because I remember we left the base, and so we had to walk probably a mile and a half to get up to Coronado, California, which is across from San Diego, and then we got on a streetcar and we rode to the end of the line, downtown Coronado, and got off, and then the ferry boat came there, and then we had to wait, and then we got on the ferry boat, we took the ferry across to San Diego, then we got on the streetcar and rode the streetcar to the end of the line, got to Chula Vista, and then we had to hire a taxi cab to get out to where these girls live. All right, then we leave, and we got to come back to San Diego because we're going to the dance in San Diego. Again, I danced very successfully because these places are so crowded you really couldn't dance. And then we had to take the girls back to Chula Vista, and then we had to come back. And all right, now the streetcars only run infrequently because we're out at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then the ferry boats only run every half hour instead of regularly, so you got to wait for the ferry boat, and then the streetcar runs, and so there we're getting back to the amphibious training base at south of Coronado there, and again it's 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. I said we could have jumped in the water over Chula Vista and swam across the bay and made it faster, but as I think back to those nights and the transportation problems, of course nobody had a car or anything, and so when you went out like that, it very often involved no sleep, because the next day comes and you got to go. Then I could go advance a little farther. Of course, we left for in January. Our ship loaded troops, and we left for Hawaii, and we unloaded troops at Hawaii. And then we went up to Kauai for 4 days to unload some cargo, and that was like paradise up there. And then back to Honolulu and going to Waikiki and swimming. And the Navy had taken over the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. We had an officers club in there. I could not stay there. The Submariners stay there, but we swam in the surf there at Waikiki, and we went out to dinner, and I took a group of sailors on a tour of the island, and then we steamed out and we invaded Maui and anti-aircraft practice, shotguns, and it was fun. Now I can tell you, one day we were invading Maui, and we got all our boats in the water, and then we loaded some beach party, and then we stormed the beach, and they laid down the smoke screen, and we had to come through the smoke screen and hit the beach at the exact time and unload our troops, and this was all practice. And then they sent a boat back to the ship and got some dinner, and then we had picnic lunch on the beach, went swimming, and then I don't remember at Maui. I've been there now, and it's all people and development. At the time, I think what we used to call BA swimming, which is bare-ass swimming because you don't have your swimsuit along, but there was nobody around. And then we went back to the ship, put all our boats aboard. We had 26 boats that we carried on the ship, 7-ton. The LCVPs were weighed about 7 tons, and got all those loaded and board the ship. Then the captain went out the ocean way, stopped the ship, put a couple boats in the water, and then he declared a swimming party. So went swimming again. Tough war in Hawaii. It was really, really fun. And then, of course, when we left Hawaii, then we were heading for the Okinawa invasion, and you were heading for a different thing. But
what were your responsibilities
what were my responsibilities in
Yeah.
the Navy at that time? Okay, I was a member of the boat group, and so I was a junior officer. So we operated these boats, and then I was a assistant officer of the deck. Right, once we left Hawaii, then, for instance, I'm up on deck on watch, and we're zigzagging. We're in convoy, and we're escorted, so zigzagging means you change course many times an hour, and basically you're going on, say you're going on a course 242, but you're going to the left of it, to the right of it, and so basically you make about 85% of the direction you're going. But a submarine who's tracking you can't figure out what your course is so that they could intercept you. So that was my job, to zigzag, and then you got to be so many yards behind the ship ahead of you, and so many yards from the ship to the side of you, as in these patterns. And so if I had to check the ship ahead of me, that I was 600 yards back of it, and so by looking at looking at the water line, and then at the top of their mast, I knew the height of their mast, that angle I could tell my distance, and then if I needed to slow the ship down, I called the engine room and made 1 less RPM or 2 less RPM, or I sped up. And so that I did on the bridge, and then give the commands for changing the course to the helmsman, come left to new course such and such, and did things like that. And then maintenance on the ship, we were responsible for the middle of the ship and the chipping and the painting. I didn't do the chipping and the painting. The men did the chipping and the painting, and we, of course, the Navy was an officer was a pretty good lifestyle. When we went down to dine, to eat aboard ship, well, we had tables and had tablecloths on, pads and tablecloths, and I'm officer number 371,117, and so if you were 371,115, you sat closer to the head table than I did. I sat where I sat because of my number and my rank, and then we had the Negro. The only things that a Negro could do aboard ship was to be a steward's mate and work in that field. You didn't have Negroes in other divisions. They were segregated, and so they were our waiters. So we were waited on and served at the table, and then McElroy was the one that made my bed, that took my laundry, and so a naval officer in World War II, and they do now too, except that the Negroes are mixed in, and I don't know who does the work, but we lived very well. I can remember dining on the ship, and having the waiter, the steward's mate, come and with a pitcher of water and pour the water on the table, and wet it down and stick my plate in it so it don't slide this way and slide that way as the ship rolls 10-15 degrees. Those ships really rolled in those days, and so to eat under those conditions, that would be extreme conditions and such. And then when they came and woke me at 3:30 in the morning, because I'm going on watch at the 4 o'clock, and they stick a flashlight in my face, and then I could go down to the wardroom, and there would be a steward's mate on duty, and he would make me a cup of hot chocolate if I wanted that before I went up, and then I'd put my glasses on, my goggles, and keep cranking them down as my eyes adjusted to darkness, and then by the time I went up to the bridge and took my goggles off, then I could see right away in the darkness. So you'd wear goggles, and they were Polaroids, and you could keep darkening them, and so then your pupils would open up. So by the time you were ready to go out, of course, all the steaming was done, no lights on anything. We had to keep our porthole in our cabin was closed at night, and we had a curtain across the door, but you used subdued light, and had to have that porthole, which was our only ventilation. So when you got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, I can remember my Ed Rothmeyer getting up, and you'd see Ed, and he'd light up a cigarette, which I disliked, and to smoke, and then he'd take a towel and towel himself off because you're sweating. It's hot, man. it was hot. There wasn't the I-beam above my bunk. I had an upper bunk, and during the day when the sun was out, that I-beam would get so hot that you couldn't touch it, and I got to sleep on it. And so you didn't sleep during the day, and also if I came out of my bed real hard, if the general alarm sounded or something and came up too quick, that I-beam would hit me right across the forehead there. So I had limited room, but we had 4 of us lived in a stateroom, lived very well. So what were my duties? Then on the invasion, then I was in charge of so many boats, and we went to another ship and loaded troops, and I think I was in the 5th wave that was supposed to hit the beach and bringing the troops in at the day of, and the H hour was such and such, and so we ran boats, and then I was assigned to a boat, and I did I think for 2 different days I had charge of a boat and a crew, and we were stationed over by the command ship, the GC, where the admiral and the general were running the invasion from. And so if somebody wanted to ride to shore, we took them ashore, we brought them back, we ran errands. And one night we had finished up and were supposed to be off duty, and we're into the river, can't say the name of it now, at Okinawa, and some guy comes along the beach and wants to ride out to the command ship. And I'm there in the darkness, and I said to him, I said, we're off duty. We're supposed to be all done, supposed to have been done a while ago. We're on our way back to our own ship. These men haven't had anything to eat and I'm doing that, and I finally say, oh, come on, we'll give you a ride. And of course, that's so many miles out this way to the command ship, and ours is a distance away, and we got to go find it in the darkness and such. And so anyhow, I just said, oh well, come on. And I'm sitting up on top of the engine housing, diesel engine on that, and this guy comes in, and then the men pull the ramp up, and he walks in and carrying his bag and jumps up beside me, and I turned to him to introduce myself, and I'm Ensign D.A. Jerde, and I turned to introduce myself, and I'm looking at his collar, and right there he's a brigadier general. And I often wonder, what would he have done if I had refused to give him a ride, see? And I looked right into that star and realized that, oh gosh, the guy I almost turned down giving him a ride is a brigadier general, and I thought he'd have told me where I was going to go in a hurry, probably. But anyhow, we gave him a ride. Did that. The worst duty we had there was at night. We went out and it would take 2 boats, and we had to have 1 officer. And south of the shipping area, then we were running patrol, because the Japanese supposedly had, if I say it right, I say the Japs, had suicide boats. And they would come up there and just going to ram into one of our ships and explode and kill themselves. Of course, the suicide airplanes were real common at that time. And so we had to patrol that area. And we had these LCPPs, and we had 230 caliber machine guns, and then we had some I think homemade explosives that we could light and throw at them. I don't know what we were going to do to stop those boats, but and it was such bad weather that you couldn't come up alongside the gangway and then switch crews when it was your time. We came up along the rear of the ship and these cargo nets that were over the side, and then you'd get up in the gunwale of this LCVP, and then as it came up and the waves were running 10 feet, and so as it came up and when it was at its peak, then you would jump and grab the cargo net and crawl on up and get onto the ship. And if you jumped too soon, the ship would come up and bang you and probably break your leg. And then if you were relieving, then you crawled down the cargo net, and then when the boat is up at the top of the wave, then you jumped into the boat. Very dangerous, and then the waves are such that you're wet, and you wore rain gear, of course, and it was cold, and I considered that the miserable part. Just getting the cargo into the beach and things like that weren't bad. And for the first nights, we sailed out every night to get away from the suicide planes, first night we went out, a plane, and I thought it was the plane that hit the second ship behind us, but it was a bomb that dropped, and they lost 30, 40 men or something like that. The bomb went in, and so there was, and we had a suicide plane that crashed right off our bow when we were unloading bombs one day. We carried gasoline bombs and food and trucks and bulldozers and things in our cargo. And so if that suicide plane had hit that barge that we were loading onto, well, that would have been the end of the USS Merriweather. So there was problems. One day airplane came up from south of the island, which the Japs held down towards Naha, and this Val came along the shore real close to the ground, and all of a sudden turned out towards the shipping, and you see it, and so our ship got to fire at it because we were inboard, and so you shoot your 40 millimeters at it, and it kept coming, and then it turned up and it crashed through the riggings on the ship right behind us, and we took some. That was a merchant ship, and we took some casualties from that. That was an incident that I remember, and getting up constantly for general quarters. You're up at 2 o'clock, you're up at 4 o'clock. Short of sleep, got tired.